Hello, we're back talking about Doctor Who, the thing I do the best in a normal mental capacity setting. However, it is 10 to 2 in the morning that I am now being expected to do this in, because that's the insanity of the world we're living in with Rusty Davis's productions. Well, I blame him. It might not be his fault, but he's defending it, so he'll have the flag for it, I guess. Because God knows I'm not going to wait another 18 hours to watch Doctor Who. And there's no guarantee I can watch it in the morning, and I'm not going to avoid the internet for that long to not get it spoiled. But I'm that ingrained in the fandom, and I follow that much of the content and the people that I will. It is impossible for me not to avoid spoilers. But Doctor Who's the thing I'm most passionate about, so I'm going to watch it the second it comes out. This week we start off with both special. It feels so weird. It just feels so weird. It feels so. I mean, it would feel wronger if being up at this time doing live streams and talking about shows was unusual for me. But anyway, enough about my personal life. I am somewhat hesitant, shall we say, to look. It's been a while since I've watched Doctor Who and felt the way I feel right now, which is just a sense of adventurous joy. Like, I have to be honest. I've just realized I bought this mug off of Viva La League. If you've seen it, you'll get the reference. Or I bought it for this pun, but I realized that when I use it as a right-handed person, it shows this side, and that's a bit disappointing. Anyway, sorry, I need to stop blabbering. Oh well, no, I don't. I can do what I want, but I should probably concentrate. So hey Lewis, thanks for joining the stream. Yes, I've just started the stream, so jumping the gun a bit on me getting to that point, but it's kind of tragic that your episode stopped working at that point. I mean, why are you watching this? Go refresh your browser and watch the end of the episode, you muppet. Essentially, yes, it was a random musical number. So I've just tweeted about it. Essentially, the second episode, for some reason, we're jumping at the end because Lewis has now brought the conversation there. Thank you, Lewis. The second episode ends with what is essentially just a random music number that I'm sure people are going to be complaining about. And you know what? In the words of the Doctors themselves, there's no being grown up if you can't be childish sometimes. And that was just fun. It was fun. I enjoyed it. Anyway, let me time travel back, and we'll talk about both palettes. But at no point have I ever. The 60th specials were the only time I remember being a Doctor Who fan and having severe concerns about the state of the show and worrying about it being on a decline that we would not necessarily that would be damaging in some way. But I was also hopeful that was a blip. I've always maintained that if it's period of Doctor Who where you feel like the show isn't delivering on what your expectations are, it's a 50, 60 now year old show. It's going to flip and flop, and it's going to try new things because that's how it stays alive, and inevitably that means it'll do things you don't like. And I've been lucky in that I've been fairly open with what Doctor Who has been delivering on for the last 19 years that I've been a consistent and massive fan. And the 60th was the first time that kind of faith wavered a bit. But I was hesitant. I was hesitant going into Space Babies. I was hesitant for a lot of Space Babies because Space Babies had a mixed reaction with me, which I'll talk about in a second. But between the two episodes, and between honestly the fantastic quality of Devil's Cord, and just what it was playing around with and the concepts and what it was trying to embody, no, I think my faith is being very much rewarded here. This is very much. I felt that joy that I felt when I watched Doctor Who for the last few years on a Saturday, on a Sunday evening, and the joy I felt when I watched it in the previous years when I was before I came to university, and it was with my family and watching it on TV. So everything is good. We are good. So my mixed reaction to the Space Babies. Let me talk about my negatives first, because my negatives vastly outweigh my positives. I think more so with Millie Gibson than Ncuti Gatwa. I think Millie Gibson, and to their credit, they're still a relatively new actor. They're able to do subtle and drama. They're able to do subtle and nuance and drama very well, but for some reason the direction expects them to do pantomime level esque, exaggerated. And I said this in my trailer reaction. I clocked onto it. For some reason, the director, in at least, maybe it's a director thing, to be honest, because I don't notice this as much in The Devil's Card. And I don't think it happened as much in The Devil's Card. I think they either reined it in, or maybe it was a different director. I'm going to assume they were directed by two people. I'm not going to interrupt my stream of thoughts by checking. I'll check later on. Once upon a time, I would have remembered who the directors were. Clearly, time's gone old, and I've got old, and I've got more rusty. But in Space Babies, and to be honest, also in The Church of Ruby Road, there was a degree of like exaggeration to how Millie Gibson played the role in a lot of the scenes, which kind of put me off because it was very distracting, to be frank. In Space Babies, they definitely flip-flopped. There were parts where it was clear, but the direction was more nuanced and subtle, and Gibson was being asked to play the role essentially more naturalistically, and it worked, and it bounced off Ncuti Gatwa's performance very, very well. And then there were other parts where either it's poor direction or bad direction, in my opinion anyway, and those were the worst. That's what kind of kept taking me out of the episode. There'll be parts where something happens, and she just reacts so over the top that you're like, you're playing a character in a science fiction fantasy exaggerated environment, and it kind of I need either the environment to be exaggerated or I need you to be exaggerated. I can't be both. But that wasn't consistent, and in this case, the inconsistency was good because it was the times where Gibson was able to actually play the role with much more kind of nuance and subtlety actually came out very well. And then when we go into Devil's Cord, there's much more of that. So I feel like I don't know which order these episodes were filmed in, and I probably think it's very unlikely that Space Babies was the first one that was refilmed, because it never seems to be that case. I might be wrong. So hopefully the more we see of Millie and the more she kind of settles into her role, and hopefully, in next season, which will all be filmed after this season, that's better. So I mean, I had big concerns about Ruby Road as a companion based off the Church of Ruby Road, the Christmas special, because I didn't feel it was she was portrayed very well. But I think my concerns are kind of being alleviated now, and I think I'm much more favourable to how she was acting, essentially. That also not to say that Ncuti Gatwa doesn't play the Doctor in a very exaggerated way, but he's playing the Doctor. You can get away with it more. The Doctor has wildly varying personalities, and if this Doctor is somebody who and the way that then Gatwa kind of clashes that with, it's not new. But one point of being is it's not a new concept that the Doctor will use childish behavior or exaggerated behavior or very campy or very kind of dramatic or exaggerated behavior to disguise a much more kind of darker undertone. And there are parts where the facade drops and you see that dark undertone in Gatwa's performance. And so I'm very willing to kind of accept that this is just a Doctor who just happens to be a bit more cartoony, a bit more exaggerated, a bit more camp, a bit more leaning into the fantasy element, or at least a Doctor who is utilizing that aspect to disguise other elements. And that is fine. It's annoying that I'm having to react to 2 episodes in one here, because it's any of the minutiae and the details that I picked up on, or obviously in the first episode, are obviously going to be overtaken by the more frequent, recent memories of the second episode. So I'm trying to get, if I pause for a second, it's because my neurodivergent brain is having a small kind of catch up session. Like now, for example. I think between two episodes, we're clearly like leading into a. And I don't know if this is a series arc or a directional change for the show, both of which are fine. And in fact, if anything, I'd like it to be a directional change for the show. It was speculated, if not clearly explicit, that Russell T Davies is trying to explore more of the fantasy elements of fiction. So obviously, you know, in The Giggle, well, in both, I suppose, really in between Wild Blue Yonder and The Giggle, we started to play less with the science of problems and the logic of problems, and more in terms of just the fairy tale nature of dealing with problems. And that's continuing here. You know, the fact that space babies had the boogeyman as an enemy. I mean, that was more scientific, but then we had, you know, Devil's Cord, and that very much leaned more into it. But even between the two, the fact that the Doctor's able to like, it's caring more about the kind of the feel of the situation and the notions rather than the specifics. And that sentence made no sense. But what I'm referring to here is the butterfly scene. When Ruby steps on the butterfly, becomes a lizard creature, the Doctor heals the butterfly and everything's back to normal. And there's not really an explanation, but that's because the explanation isn't the point. It's meant to be a fun kind of scene that's dealt with very, very kind of casually. And that's something that Russell T Davies is doing a lot. They're dealing with things very casually. They're not caring about the minutiae, the details of the specifics. But just trying to do the scene in a way which evokes a sense of fun and adventure and whimsy without being bogged down in, I guess, all that nerdy. And I think that's perhaps a point of contention, because nerds are by nature and by our own virtue very kind of particular to the detail of a situation. Myself very much included there. But I think it's fine for us to take a step back. I'm being very complimentary to Russell T Davies now, and I guess that's because credit where credit's due. I'm still not walking back on my criticisms of how I think he's dealing with the show on a production level over the last few months. You know, be that his weird kind of detached ally approach to dealing with social concepts, or the fact that he's made this show broadcast initially at midnight, or any of the other things. But I'll give credit's due. These were two strong openings that are dealing with this change of direction very, very well. The babies appearing on screen and having their CGI mouths move and being voiced and talking was just like, I was like, this is like such a fascinating twist on this is such like a novel original idea that of course came from the brilliant Russell T Davies, and I can't like not appreciate just the fact that that is very much something which I'm not always saying it's been missing from Doctor Who, but I guess maybe less explicit. Just the idea of you can use the show as a sandbox to explore these really new, interesting concepts. And I don't know if anyone else has kind of done anything similar, or certainly I can't remember it being a popular enough concept that, you know, this is very much treading old ground. The idea very much of having a ship crewed by mentally advanced but physically and emotionally still babies, and even then they weren't that particularly emotionally advanced. I think really it was just the fact that they were able to kind of like speak, really, is their own kind of mental advancements. It was such a great concept. In fact, they weren't just adults in baby bodies; they were still babies that had baby like needs and feelings and emotions. It was so good. I'm impressed that for the series premiere, the show didn't shy away from like having it had jump scares, but jump scares weren't particularly jumpy either. So I appreciate that. Someone who doesn't like jump scares, like we had abrupt cuts to a screaming monster on screen, but not in a way which kind of made you go or at least it made me go I'm a very jumpy person. So still invoke a certain sense of horror without invoking actually having the actual horror. Not that would be a problem with Doctor Who because that's something that's done before in the past. And the episode had like some genuine tense moments. It made me think for a moment that a baby had been eaten in the narrative by a monster. Like child death is rare in Doctor Who, but it's not like unheard of. I still think it's wild that we don't talk nearly enough about the fact that in School Reunion, a 12, 13-year-old schoolgirl gets eaten alive by a scary bat creature that rips her apart as she screams, is wild. So it wouldn't be like unheard of for Doctor Who to have essentially a baby being eaten, not necessarily on screen, but like recently. But no, the baby's back. In fact, everyone in this episode, no one dies in the first episode. It's another one of those very rare Doctor Who episodes where everyone lives. I think I don't recall anyone really dying. And it was a simple enough. I mean, it was not. There was a lot of exposition, I think, to get started, and it was during this kind of exposition period where we kind of flip-flop between the way Ruby was acting, as mentioned earlier. But once we got into like the kind of the meat, and I guess there was never really any kind of sense of. I think another criticism of the first episode was that momentum was a bit of a weird thing. It felt it never it kind of it I think it was trying to do something as this so-called episode 1 of season 1, which is trying to pretend to be and it's not. So we had to keep spending a lot of time in the episode re-establishing parts of the lore for Ruby, which is fine. Doctor Who needs several starting points because it's a 60-year-old show and you don't expect anyone to start from 1963. I would maybe expect some people to start really from 2005, and I don't think. But even then, that's like now what 15, 14 series of a show. And it, it kind of makes it feel more like a historical ongoing event if you can jump in at a certain point and not necessarily have to know the previous history, because like the same way you jump into someone's life in real life without having to know them from the second they're born. But yeah, so the episode did keep having to stop. Doctor once again identifies as being the last of their race because of the Masters' genocide. It's interesting. It's kind of the same thing that Eccleston's Doctor had to do about their species being wiped out, but they're leaving it much more vague now, so we're not having to like necessarily refer to the. So the Russell Davies came in and had for his entire run that the Doctor was the last of the Time Lords, and then the fact that the Time Lords were still existent in a way was actually they weren't, because when they appeared in the end of time they were being brought from the Time War, so they were time traveling. The fact that the Masters arrived, Master still there was a big significant thing, and then the Time Lords coming back was a big significant thing, but it was still like a consistent thing throughout the entirety of Russell T Davies's Doctor Who run, initial one, RTD1, that the Doctor was last of Time Lords, and then before the end of Matt Smith's era, the Time Lords came back, and not enough massive amount was done with them, but that was fine. They brought Time Lords back. Well, I don't know if it was fine or not. They brought them back, and it felt like there was going to be like a kind of build up to them, but actually they only kind of dealt with them once at the end of, after 2 series later, midway more or less through Capaldi's era, and then the next time we see them in Whittaker's era is when they'll get wiped out again. So they don't really last that long and significantly. But then again, the Time Lords don't appear a huge amount in Classic Who anyway. So I think that's pretty much par for par. So yeah, so the Chibnall's basically given Doctor Who back to David to the same position that David's left Doctor Who in terms of where the Time Lords are at. So he spends the time establishing that the Doctor's last of their race and that they were adopted. There's this weird, not weird necessarily, actually, it's kind of makes sense. There's this part where the Doctor establishes that a lot of Time Lords choose titles as names. And I guess there is a reading of that scene that might make you think that all Time Lords have titles as names, but actually it's equally a valid interpretation that a significant part, but not all Time Lords. I mean, no, not all Time Lords do that. I mean, we know they have Gallifreyan names because it's strongly implied that the Doctor does actually have another name apart from the Doctor. But there's also this element of chosen names and what that means to you, and that it's common within Tamil culture for someone to choose a different name and use that as their sole identity. And it's very kind of there's a lot you can draw from that. There's a lot of real world knowledge you can draw from that as well, and I think that's perfectly fine. And again, it connects to this idea, and it gets brought up a lot in this episode about how the Doctor was supposedly abandoned by their biological species and found, and that's the main thing. And it's again drawing from the themes of Timeless Children, but playing into it to kind of build upon that, which is absolutely the correct approach that Russell T Davies should be taking with that, as someone who is very much a big fan of the Timeless Children reveal and thinks that everyone who detracts from it kind of missed the whole point of that element. So, like I said, no one dies. This episode isn't really a bad guy. I did get kind of lost, or not lost per se, but I think we glossed very quickly over how the Bugman came to be and its purpose, and really it's kind of that thing again where you're supposed to accept you're meant to accept the answer given to you on face value without thinking too much about the depth of the why of the world or how it builds into everything. Essentially, this ship has been abandoned, a educational program malfunctioned, and it believed that the best way to teach children through the elements of storytelling was to put them through through a narrative and a story as a fairy tale story themselves, and obviously to do that they needed the monster to fight, so it gave them the Bogeyman. It was a bit unclear about kind of what that was meant to achieve, but that's fine. Again, a lot of the episode's runtime had to back and forth between establishing the premise of the episode and the threats, and also just talking about the Doctor and Ruby and the backstory stuff, so it didn't really have time to flesh out the story, but it was simple enough that that's fine with. And it had some really cute concepts. Again, the babies, the fact that there's a nanny filter, even if it kind of got a bit cheesy at times, in my opinion. What else? Did they establish what happened to the Bogeyman? I can't actually remember. I guess it just stayed in the ship, right? And I guess they're going to deal with it, I guess, to what planet we're traveling to. I see that Russell T Davies has got his fascination with using bodily functions as a plot device out of the way early. What we had bogies being used, we had a huge amount of reference to fecal matter for some reason. Flatulence, obviously, can't miss a flatulence. Gross, hopefully it's not going to be a recurring element. I'm glad we got that early. So yeah, I had positive to mixed views of Space Babies. I was kind of concerned by the end of it in terms of how mixed we're going to go going forward. All the concerns out the window. There were still some cheesy elements of Devil's Cord, but it played into those. I mean, the entire time there was so much I think I don't know how much I don't know. The episode worked so well as it was that by the end of it, I was very much going back on this initial thought. But when it first started, I'm like, oh, I kind of wish this episode was a musical because it has the setup for it. The way that, what's their name? The way that Jinx Monsoon introduces the episode, the nature of the kind of there's clearly a lot of inspiration being taken from the concept of musicals, with the fourth wall breaks and the meta elements and the delivery and the presentation of the episode. But it's not a musical, but it kind of alludes to the concept of musicals, I think. So the way that Jinx Monsoon as Maestro appears in the cold opening to kind of establish them as a threat and what they're about and and laying the kind of frameworks of that, and the way that they kind of talk to the music teacher. And I mean, maybe it's just, I think if anything, it's a lot of it's due to the way Jinx Monsoon is speaking, which is that very much that kind of camp delivery of dialogue that you do get you do get in musicals on stage. It's very much a stage way of speaking, a slightly pan-Atlantic tone, the dramatical Shatner-esque delivery of lines. It's very theatrical. I think theatrical is really the word I'm looking for here. And it kind of made me think, oh, this would work very well as a musical. It didn't end up being a musical, and it's fine because it works so well anyway. And like I said, this episode looks like such fun to make, and it was made so well. But they played around a lot with the camera, in a way which looks as absolute joy. Like during I'm bouncing around the episodes here, but during the music off between the Doctor and the Maestro. Also, remember when people were speculating that Jinx Monsoon was going to play a new incarnation of the Master because they were called Maestro, which is another word for the Master, even though it's also a common way to refer to someone who is an expert in music. And it turns out that actually they were the offspring of the Toymaker. So I wasn't expecting, I say I wasn't expecting us to hark back to the giggle so early, but then actually I think it was very much established that that was going to be a recurring factor very soon, very quick. So I guess second episode does make sense. The Maestro is established to be child, the offspring of the Toymaker, where the Toymaker uses games as a element of their power. Maestro uses music. Makes sense. Simple concept. Works very well. Executed fantastically. Like it's hard to take sometimes it's very easy to falling into the trap of taking a simple concept and trying to make it so kind of uniquely executed that you actually miss the trees for the woods and completely like overshoot. Simple concept. Didn't have to go into much depth about it. Basically, he took the concept of the Toymaker and used music instead of toys and games, and it worked brilliantly, and there was no notes. And obviously, the way that Jinx Monsoon played a role as being this kind of like chaotic entity of music, but very much it makes sense given their professional background, but the idea of this very much camp drag stage presence on screen worked very well. It worked very well diegetically. I have to say, I really love the joke about the Doctor pausing me, because there's a part of the episode where just before Ruby is grabbed by the Maestro, music starts playing in the background, and that music is actually part of it's diegetic music. The Doctor's like, I thought that music was non-diegetic, implying that the Doctor can hear the soundtrack of Doctor Who. Also, the cold opening, I'm bouncing around so much here, I'm sorry. The cold opening ends with the Maestro looking to camera and starting to play on the piano of a Doctor Who theme, which plays then into the titles and then transitions into the jukebox. And it's absolutely ridiculous. It breaks so many fourth wall elements. It should upset me because the fourth wall elements being broken. I'm like, why are we doing this? But it's just so clever and so good, and I like it when we play around with things like this in TV. I like when we mess around with genres. I like when we mess around with conventions. I love when we break rules. You should always be breaking rules when you're telling art, and when you break the rules and it's executed well, everything else is forgivable. And the fact that that's the case, I mean, I don't for one second think that. But also it plays into the whole... Actually, no, I was going to say, I don't think for a second that we're meant to assume that they play with Doctor Who theme on a jukebox. But really, with the whole fairy tale element of Doctor Who that's not being introduced, but it's being very much kind of becoming a less of a genre, more of an actual element of the show, of the threads. Why not? Why not have reality and the show bleeding into each other and messing around as a concept? And that's clearly happening. I mean, there are a whole bunch of fourth wall breaks. Again, I think in a way which is meant to be invoking a sense of this is musical inspired, but not actually musical based. Monsoon directly addressing the camera, before. I mean, people have addressed Cameron Doctor Who before, but it's usually implied that it's like not necessarily them talking to us. And again, and now it's just hit me. I also recall that obviously Mrs. Flood does that very notably in the cold closing. Is that a thing? The post-credit scene of Church Ruby Road. Okay, clearly that wasn't a fluke. Clearly we're establishing a precedence here. But obviously you've got Maestro addressing the camera. You've got the Doctor winking towards the camera. We feel that musical scene, which I'm not entirely sure if it's. I mean, I assume that musical scene wasn't there for the fun of it, and in terms of the episode, it's a reflection of the fact that the Maestro's powers have gone and music is coming back to the world, and it's able to kind of inspire that. Is what my kind of canon of it is. Whew, that was a whole bunch of thoughts that I spilled off, and I have to briefly pause for breath and drink my invisible water bottle. So, where was I? I've lost my train of thought here entirely. Yeah, Devil's Call. The episode was great. People assumed, as I assumed, maybe also led to believe from the marketing that this was a episode around the Beatles. Episode around the Beatles, but actually the Beatles play such a very small role in it. It's basically just, if anything, it's coincidental that they're around. This isn't your typical historical drama, Doctor Who historical drama, where the historical figure is a guest character and a guest companion of the Doctor. You know, it's not Charles Darwin running after the Doctor or Shakespeare running after the Doctor. The Beatles essentially appear in like 3 scenes and that's it. They're not like a driving force. It's just essentially that Ruby wants to go see the Beatles, and then they happen to be in 1963 dealing with this issue. And the Beatles very much don't play a role in the natural narrative. It could basically be any. And some people, I guess, if you're big fans of the Beatles, might see that as a missed opportunity. I honestly couldn't care less about the Beatles, if I'm being frankly honest. So I don't really care that much. I think the episode picked its priority and did it well. And you know, there's nothing stopping us from visiting the Beatles at another point. They had a career that lasted not a short amount of time, so I'm sure there's plenty of opportunities if you so wished. I mean, it's not as if we haven't visited the same person twice before in Doctor Who, so but yeah, the premise is that this creature is trying to like suck music out of the entire universe, because the less music that there is being created, the more that they can invoke the natural music of the universe, and that's an environment they thrive in. Interesting concept. I mean, it's an interesting twist. It's not that this creature is harmed by or hates music. It's that they want to essentially distill. I think, if my reading is correct, essentially want to distill the universe to do what they deem to be. They're purists, and unfortunately, to them, human music and music of other creatures is a distraction from the pure music of the universe, and it's fine. And that's and it's interesting because obviously that's a concept that the Doctor, you know, introduces earlier in the episode as just a fact of life, and not necessarily an evil thing. But obviously, this creature is trying to take that and make it into an evil thing. So that was kind of fun. Again, like it's not the obvious kind of motivation, and I like that. It doesn't play a huge role. The motivation isn't important for this one-off villain. Especially as an agent of chaos, but it's nice that we kind of didn't go for the obvious, and that's sometimes all you need to make a episode feel fresh and novel and executed in a very interesting way. You just throw these enough original elements into it. I mean, that's essentially what the art of storytelling is nowadays. There's nothing wrong with that. So yeah. Music's gone from the world in 1963, and so the Doctor tries to work it out. The Doctor and Ruby try to work it out. Oh, there's a nice element where they're on the roof of a building and the Doctor makes an explicit reference to Susan. Now, this isn't the first reference to Susan in New Who, but I can't actually recall how many times we've made explicit references. I mean, I believe in the Rings of Akaten, the Doctor references his granddaughter, and I think that's possibly the only time in New Who that they do. Even though it's not by name, they reference the fact that they've had children or grandchildren, but I don't know if this is time. This is. I think that was perhaps the first time. So, and I think that this makes this the first time that we heard the name Susan in New Who. I mean, I am a forever. I live in hope for Carol and what's her name? Not Duffy. Ford to return back to Doctor Who as Susan, whilst they're still around, and find delivering on the promise of the Doctor coming back and getting Susan again. This episode establishes that the Doctor assumes that Susan. It's always been weird because obviously last time we saw Susan in TV canon was left on Earth in the Dalek invasion. So we have no reason to assume that they returned to Gallifrey, and obviously no reason to assume that they were impacted by the Time War. This episode establishes that. Well, actually, it's not clear whether the Doctor believes that Susan died in the Time War, or that Susan died in the Masters genocide. When they talk about genocide in the Space Babies, I think it's clear they're talking about the Masters genocide. Here, I think it would make more sense for them to speculate that Susan was a casualty or a potential casualty of the Time War. But who knows? It seemed odd for them to be so callous about it if Susan dying was a recent thing. But there's also several reasons for that. Anyway, and also a considerable amount of time has passed, and also I guess the whole point was this is meant to be a post-therapy Doctor. Not that that's a thing we're really delving into. We kind of very much skipped over that as a concept, but whatever. I keep having to adjust my vertical framing on the vertical version of this video and then readjusting it because I keep moving around. But it's nice that the episode remembered that 1963 the Doctor was around in their earlier William Hartnell incarnation with going to school. And obviously that 1963 is the year Doctor Who came about. It's also when McCoy's Doctor's about hiding the hand of Omega, but we don't make a reference to that, but that's fine. I think that's too much clunkiness. We only need to make one reference. Ooh, someone is spamming me with laugh reacts on my vertical thing. Thank you. Well, at least you're engaging with me, so that's nice. Ooh, love reacts as well. Good. Yes, I got them. I'm using it and making you affectionate. And yeah, there's a part where the Doctor seems absolutely there's a part I don't quite buy, where the Doctor is very, very terrified by the idea of fighting Maestro to a point where they run away and hide rather than dealing with the problem. And I don't know why they would act that way. I get it's meant to be invoking that these pantheon level beings aren't like trifles, but also the Doctor isn't a trifle either. And the response that the Doctor had when they saw the Toymaker again in the giggle of fear but standing their ground is what I would expect the Doctor to react if they're ever approached by something they genuinely aren't sure if they would be able to defeat. I mean, the episode establishes it by saying that the Doctor beat the Toymaker by the skin of their teeth, and they're not sure if they can do the same trick twice. The whole point of the Toymaker and the Pantheon is that you can't replicate your strategy because they only work at one time. So I suppose like is explained. I just don't get from a narrative perspective what the point of that delay was. Um, um, it's I feel like he could have like not had that clunkiness and still like executed the same elements, but the scene with the Doctor using the sonic screwdriver. Also, there's a lot of critique around the shape of the new sonic screwdriver, the kind of remote shape rather than the pen shape. Or indeed, screwdriver shape, I should say. I didn't really notice too much in these 2 episodes, primarily because the shape of screwdriver is so like small, miniature. It's like I mean, it's not like this, but like it's like it fits in your palm so easily that when you're using it, you can't really see it as much. Whereas the other screwdrivers, it's annoying. I'm having to demonstrate this with like other things on my desk that aren't sonic screwdrivers because all my sonic screwdrivers are in a drawer all the way back there in the other side of my room. Whereas actual sonic screwdrivers protrude out of the hand, so they're much more of an on-screen element. Is kind of my whole thing at the moment, but I'm not thinking too much about it. I think we got all of our ridicule of a new sonic screwdriver design out in social media posts when it was announced online sometime last year, so we don't need to kind of do it now. I like the part where they use the sonic screwdriver to basically like remove all sound as a way to temporarily like protect themselves. Because the maestro could use sound to help track them down. Both of those mechanics I think are very, very interesting concepts. Just to go back onto the whole new sonic screwdriver design, I still like the fact that even though it's basically remote design, they still have to have a bit at the end for it to stick out of things so they can plug into things, which you didn't have to do with the old sonic screwdriver design because obviously it was already kind of like a cylindrical shape. And then obviously the Doctor, I like the part where the Doctor takes Ruby to the future to show them that time is always like fluid, and to kind of emphasize that they need to like they still need to like win the day, and victory isn't ever guaranteed. And I think this is why the second episode is much better than the first episode, because I think the actors have locked in more on balancing the whimsy of the serious. So it very much works here where the Doctor's like, okay, come on, follow me, I'm going to show you the future. And there was like, it's played completely seriously, it's played completely darkly. And I think that lands very, very well. So as a filmmaker myself, something I am very fond of, there's a few things I'm very fond of doing, both mainly out of necessity, with my background doing student film, is filming in sets which are very dimly lit, so I don't have a set design, and I can use the lights in a very much more narrow and focused way and pretend it's deliberate. I mean, it is deliberate. It's also just easy. And I also like filming on theatre stages. I have a background as a stage videographer, so part of me enjoys filming. Part of me enjoys what am I trying to say? Part of me enjoys filming on stages, and what I'm leading to here, sorry, is that there's a part of episode where in the future Maestro challenges Doctor and Ruby, and it's basically filmed on a stage, or what looks like a stage. It's a dark, kind of empty, not very well dressed area with spotlights and curtains and things, and I enjoyed that because it's kind of how I would film such a scene, and it's just proof that you can do so much with so little. Oh, in both this and Space Babies, we're back to the companions of the Doctor, particularly women, being these mystery box plot devices. There is parts of Ruby's backstory, which are a driving arc plot of the series, and they're doing weird things for some unclear reason. When the Doctor was trying to challenge, well, not trying to challenge, but the Doctor was trying to explore an element of Ruby's backstory, he had a temporal kind of transplacement. I'm techno babbling here as if that was anything what the show was explaining. His memory of when they went to go see Ruby's biological mother changed, and they saw this change in front of them, where instead of their mother simply walking away, their mother turns around and points at you. And let me tell you, as someone who LARPs, someone in the dark, especially near a church or religious area, wearing a black robe, turning around and pointing at you is never not terrifying. Just if that ever happens to you, you're in a horror film. Run away. And then Snow appears on the space station. Like, it's not just that the Doctor's memory changes; it causes a real thing, and it's like, well, why is it happening? I mean, this episode is a really cool thing where what I thought was non-diegetic music actually apparently was diegetic music. The whole Gregorian chanting or the church like chanting that we heard during the flashback sequences towards the church segments with the Doctor and Ruby is apparently music that's part of Ruby's soul, and it's enough to hurt Maestro that they weren't able to fully like attack and kill Ruby, or pull all the music out of Ruby in a way which would have killed Ruby, because that kind of protected them, and that adds to the mystery of who Ruby is. And when that happened, Snow appeared as well. So clearly we're going to keep bouncing back to the Ruby's origin and what that means element of this mystery, which, yeah, let's see where that goes, I guess. But I did like that scene. Did like the reveal again. It's reveals like that, which has a very kind of a strong, resonant, nostalgic vibe in me that I'm glad I'm getting a chance to live through again. Because it's been a while since that's been the case. I like the kind of music off between the Doctor, Ruby, and Maestro. It's very Doctor Strange and Madness in the Multiverse, but also very not. And then the Beatles return to save the day by, I guess, pressing the right chord. I'm not a music person, so I guess it might be something I missed there in terms of that, but that was alright. And then we end with that musical number. I enjoy this. I'm interested in seeing what the online discourse is. If it reflects what I think about this 2-part opening. Space Babies was mixed. The Devil's Chord was like top tier. I figure people are going to be relatively positive towards this episode. And I'm glad that my faith and critique period against Doctor Who is ending, and it was a blip. It's a shame that it's a very kind of encompassing blip of the entirety of the 60th specials, but you take the highs and the lows, the rough and the smooth. I've been Harris Qureshi. I hope to still be Harris Qureshi. I'm gonna go and probably sleep because I'm gonna be in duty in a few hours' time. I'm not actually longer than that, but I've got to be up anyway. Is the point. I guess one advantage of watching it online is that I don't like when I watched it on broadcast. I couldn't do my reaction straight away because I went to watch behind the scenes content that was being broadcast straight afterwards. Before I did that, whereas now I don't feel the need to do it so quickly. So able to do reactions faster. But I woke up 5 minutes before it was broadcast. I almost missed it from falling asleep, which I think is ridiculous. So, I mean, I think it's maybe happened once before, but still. So I'm gonna bounce. Let me know what you think. And yeah, I guess we're going to be back here this time next week. Probably not as late because it's not going to be 2-parter. And hopefully we get a strong streak. I mean, I don't think unifying fans should be... Well, I don't know. It's complicated. I don't think you should sacrifice quality of you get from Risk by playing it easy just so you can get more. You can have more unanimity between fans. On the other hand, I am so sick of being part of fandoms with so much infighting in that, if I'm being frankly honest, it would be lovely for that to kind of smell together. So we'll see how it goes. Maybe Russell T Davies is going to redeem themselves in my eyes. And the next episode, I think, is the Moffat episode, actually, next week. The one where they're stuck on a landmine the entire episode and they can't move, but they still got to save the day. We'll see how that goes. People are like, oh, this is such like a Steven Moffat concept, and that's not untrue. Something similar I think something similar did happen in Flatline, where the Doctor was trapped in a place and couldn't actually interact with the environment and had to work through Clara. But I think the themes of those are different. That was Clara being the Doctor more than anything else, whereas this is the Doctor still having to be the Doctor but not able to move. And it'd be interesting to see. It'd be very interesting for me, as with the amount of commentary that I have done over Moffat's time as a showrunner of Doctor Who, to see how they write for Doctor Who again during a time that they aren't showrunning, because we would not have had that in 15 years. So that'd be interesting. Anyway, I'm talking too long. I've already put the credits up now. I should probably bounce. See yous.